Hi there folks, it's John again. I'm in the back of the shop today where we keep our extra workbenches and there's enough floor space to do this video. Today I'd like to talk about this saw bench. What I'd like to do in this video is cover basically three things. Overview of the project, some tips on sawing. We're going to use hand saws today. And also at the end I'd like to talk about some joinery options because this is put together with half laps at the corners. This particular bench we did for me, so it's the height I like, which is 22 inches, and that's great for sitting. Usually my workbenches are 34.5, 35 inches high, so a taller seat like this is great for working at the workbench. Usually, bar stools will run 26 to 30 inches tall, which is just a little too tall for me, and a normal chair under 20, where you're in that 16 to 18 range, you know, you feel like the little kid at a table where you can't quite see. So this is a great height just for sitting, if nothing else. It also makes a great step stool. The joinery is pretty straightforward. The vertical and the horizontal pieces are half-lapped at the corner to lock that together. And then there are spacers in between. To lock everything together, we've screwed it. So there are screws that run all the way through from either side, and those are plugged as well. This particular one we made out of ash because we just wanted it a little bit fancy and nice for the magazine. It is a little heavier, so it doesn't move around on you, but it's still not bad. The reason I went skeletonized on this was to make it easier for clamping. So if I'm at about 5.5, 6 inches wide, and I want to get a clamp all the way across, I have to have a pretty big clamp to reach all the way to the gutter where I want to do most of my sawing. By having these openings, I can use smaller clamps to get into a variety of areas for whatever I'm wanting to hold down while I need to work on it. That was kind of the base idea I had for why I wanted it to do this way. I wanted to be able to clamp as much as possible on this with a variety of clamps. So you don't have to buy the largest, most expensive clamps to make the thing work. Most of the time when I am using this with flat boards on top, I'm holding it down unless it's something that's big, heavy, long, I can't control very well. What I'd like to do is start out just by ripping a thinner board to size, and I'll bring this up and show you. I've already done one edge. So what I'm doing on this board, this is a cherry board, and you can see the grain is at an angle. So this is the end of a board off a crooked log, and I only need the center section, so I've already ripped off this piece of sapwood. Now I'm going to rip off this. And you'll notice it's kind of in a wedge shape. So I'm not going to just rip this down and have angled grain. I want to try to have the grain as pleasing as possible for the project that I'm doing. So this has already been started. I could hang this out over the edge, saw just like this, but I like to be right in the middle on this gutter where you're supported on both sides. Usually when I'm sawing, I make sure that I'm not going to saw into the saw bench as much as possible, and I'm just holding this down and cutting. And then most of the time, I'm not moving. I plant my feet and I move the workpiece. This works pretty well for smaller boards that you can hold down and you're not worried about moving. If I wanted to clamp this in place, I would probably come in like this. And then on this side, I could go right across the end, clamp from the outside. I could clamp back here. I could also bring it back, clamp at the front to hold it down. Sometimes if you're just starting out with using hand saws, it really is nice to hold it down because the last thing you want to do is just worried about where the board's going. You're just trying to saw straight. There we go. You might have noticed when I clamp this down how I was holding the saw changed a little bit. This is a more standard handle pattern. I tuck my thumb in this top loop right here. Tuck my thumb, grab the top, get both hands in there. A lot of times I'll squeeze my index finger. So when I'm sawing, usually I'm like this. If it's not clamped down, I'm holding the board. If I have a second hand free, now I can get two hands in and I can push a little bit harder. So the operation we're doing is ripping. So to do that, I want to use a rip saw. I have another rip saw that you'll see, actually more common than you think. This is a thumb hole pattern. So if I'm doing it one-handed, I can point or I can tuck this, but what the thumb hole does is it gives me a specific place to put my second hand, so now I can rip. So what's the difference between a rip saw and a crosscut saw? It's how the teeth are sharpened. So on a rip saw, you're going to sharpen this with a triangular file, and the teeth are sharpened almost 90 degrees to the blade. If I get a crosscut saw for cutting across the grain, when I sharpen these teeth, the first thing you'll notice is they're a lot smaller. When I sharpen these teeth, we're sharpening them at an angle. This would be one side and they oppose, so as you sharpen, you would go down the blade. Just the basics of using this, you're going to need a crosscut saw and probably a rip saw. So rip again goes with the grain, crosscut across the grain. Now that I have my waist cut off, we have a pleasing grain pattern on the board. You'll notice I have a little trim on the ends. This is overlong. So now I would crosscut the ends. This end actually is cracked, so I need to crosscut to the crack, and then I have the usable board for what I want to do. This is the first board off a, kind of the first flitch off a log. So on the back side, you can see we still have a good amount of bark on it. With cherry, you have the darker heartwood, lighter colored sapwood. The sapwood is right under the bark. And on this, the bark is actually holding on pretty well, even though it's nice and dry. On the far end, I have a nice big crack. So I'm going to have a lot of waste on this. I'm going to cut it into short lengths that I can get usable stock out of. And this is a great function of a saw bench. I could use a handsaw on this. I could also use any kind of powered saws. I could use a circular saw, a jigsaw, a track saw. I could use a chainsaw, but we won't today. Today we're just going to use hand saws. On the top of this, I have it actually marked out. So I kind of have my layout lines. I'm going to follow this crack. This whole piece probably gets thrown away, but I have usable stock here that the first thing I'm actually going to do is cross-cut the end off. And then as this goes down, my boards kind of follow the grain as it goes. So the first steps would be cross-cutting it, and then I would actually come in and rip it with a handsaw. So let's get started on that. This is long enough now that when I'm cross-cutting this, I want to be able to hold on to this while I cut, but I don't want this part to move. Usually I would do it straight on the end, but for the sake of camera angles, I think we'll turn it just a little bit like this. And let's clamp this down. So now we're going to need a crosscut saw. Start the saw, and I have it marked right here. And there we go. First piece done. I should show you the grain on this. Where this has a nice curve to it. If we were doing a curved apron on any kind of piece, this would be an ideal piece for that because the grain just follows all the way around. But here we're just doing shorts, trying to straighten the grain as much as possible. So actually, let's do that again. Clamp it again. And again, one-handed, I'm supporting the board. If I have a ways to go and I know it has no chance of this grain breaking off, I could go for a two-handed stance. And that gives you a little more power. And there we have that cut. I already have, I don't know if it's easy to see, I have a line already drawn where I'm going to rip it along there. This was kind of that nasty end. Big crack. And I have a line drawn on that. That basically it's off, but it parallels that crack. Let's rip that next. For starting, what I'm actually doing, I'm using my thumbnail. So I'm trying not to get the fleshy part of any of my digits next to the teeth. So I'm using the nail of my thumb to get this saw curve started. And until I get it buried in the wood, that's what I'm kind of using to help guide. If you are in the process of, doing any kind of sawing and you start to cut yourself, well, just stop sawing. So if somehow you get your fingers in here and you push forward and you feel pain, just stop. You might have seen too, this moves around a little bit on me. I don't have it clamped. You can get a knee up on here. You can get 2 points of contact. And a lot of times when I exit the cut, you see me slowing down. If you go fast, there's a chance that that last little piece of wood holding on just cracks rather than cuts cleanly. So that's why I slow down. Hopefully you've seen the value of some of these clamping options. When you're using something like this, it's easy on wide boards, but the more narrow you get, the harder it becomes to hold on. So again, that's why I like the idea of skeletonizing this.